Namaste, welcome to this new edition of Upclose with Upward. Today we have Rohit Pathania, who's an environmental researcher and a columnist who often writes about and talks about Punjab affairs and the politics and culture and heritage of Punjab as well as the states around it. Welcome Rohit, welcome to Upward.
Thank you so much, Ashish.
I'd been thinking of inviting you for a long time, but finally we are here.
Well, I'm glad you were considering me to be invited here, and I really enjoy watching your conversations with such, how do you say, intellectually stimulating people as well. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. So today is something that I'd been wanting to speak for a long time. We've covered the state quite a bit, Jammu and Kashmir, in our videos and presentations. But as is the case with the national discourse, we have mostly talked about Kashmir because that takes away all the limelight, and also because I happen to be from Kashmir, so there is a natural bias. But despite that, I have a very special place for Jammu in my heart, to be very honest, because I believe that Kashmiri Hindus, my identity has survived in large part due to the magnanimity of the people of Jammu. Whether it is as the rulers of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, or later on when we were kicked out of the valley, the people of Jammu opened their homes and hearts to us. Small friction here and there is always blown out of proportion and said that oh, there was this conflict. These are two different kind of people. But in my experience, that is all unnecessary exaggeration and negative thinking. I think for the most part, we have evidence that when Hindus were thrown out of Kashmir, the first place where we found refuge was Jammu, and it was entirely due to the magnanimity of Jammu. So when we talk about Jammu these days, or if even in the historical context, it is always as an addendum to Kashmir. Why do you think that is the case?
And that's a very good question to start off. If you look at how the whole narrative about Jammu and Kashmir has been framed over the years, the only time that you ever hear about Jammu in the entire discourse is that Jammu and Kashmir was created because of a ruler of Jammu called Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, the circumstances, of course, which it came up in are very interesting in themselves, and we'll talk about it later. But you look at how the narrative has been set over the years. So-called prominent journalists that you can think of, who are supposedly Kashmir experts, have for the longest time just stuck to the four corners of Srinagar and a couple of districts like Sopore Budgam, and that's about it. That is the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir for you, which belies the fact that Jammu and Kashmir is one of the most ethnically diverse regions that you can think of. The kind of diversity that you see is probably in many ways a mirror of the diversity of India as well, in certain ways. Even in the way when you conceive the whole united J&K, parts of which today, of course, are under occupation on either side, you have Buddhists, you have Hindus, you have Sikhs, you have Muslims. Even within Muslims, you have Shias, you have Ismailis, you have Sunnis, you have Salafis and Wahhabis. And then there are ethnicities that come into picture. You have people who are of Mongoloid stock, you have people who are of, the typical Indo-Aryan stock, or you have people who have, Persian or Afghan ancestry as well in some ways, especially in the Muslims. Or you have people who literally are closer to Central Asia. So instead of identifying the fact that there is this diversity, you just stuck the narrative to four because it was very easy to create news amongst the four corners of Srinagar, as I always say. वो चार चिनारी के बीच में ही फंस गए, sadly. Now, if you think about it, the area of Jammu, as we see today, of the Jammu division, is actually at least 1.5 times bigger than the area of the Kashmir division.
Right.
But why is it then that you don't hear enough about Kashmir? I mean, rather Jammu. And you hear so much about Kashmir as if Kashmir is the only thing that you can think about when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. It is also got to do with the way we actually portray Jammu and Kashmir as a state to the international audiences. For the longest time, in fact, it has been a trend and a belief that when you talk about Jammu and Kashmir, You have to only focus on a certain part because it is representative, apparently, of the idea of India. The fact that there was a Muslim majority province that decided to accede and merge with India, which totally discounts the fact and the reasons why that accession was actually taken up in the first place. And it is always reduced to, one invasion and, those kind of things happening. There's a lot of historical baggage around it that never gets discussed often. Now, the problem with the whole idea of India theory, everybody knows. I mean, the idea of India was effectively killed in the valley as early as the 1950s and 60s. So, what are we then harping on? I never get this answer very clearly, even from the most seasoned people, as to why Jammu is supposed to be a protector of Kashmir, or rather of Indian interests in Kashmir. It cannot happen by allowing yourself to become the doormat of Kashmir. And unfortunately, Jammu has been reduced to a doormat of Kashmir. This, for instance, a very good instance comes from a statistic that people often forget. Tourist numbers going up in Kashmir like anything. Now, when you break down the numbers, you realize over 50% of them are actually going to visit Mata Vaishno Devi Shrine in Jammu.
Right.
So, in the attempt to create a certain kind of narrative, you've essentially killed the identity of Jammu. And that's, I think, the reasons why they try to do this. Trying to portray to an international audience, or rather sometimes even to a domestic audience. Whereas, I would say that this is actually the whole narrative rather is about living in a fool's paradise.
Right.
You are actually fooling yourselves more than anybody else that there is this region that seems to be entirely homogeneous.
Right.
Which is not the case.
True.
Kashmir ka culture is just restricted to certain pockets at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Even Gilgit-Baltistan is so different from Kashmir in terms of culture, in terms of outlook. They are closer to the Tibetan culture.
Right.
Though they may be Muslim, but this language, this script, they even used to use the Bhoti script for that matter.
True. No, and in fact, in one of the videos that we did with Ankur on what is happening in Jammu, about the Roshni Act, the demographic change and all that, which we will talk about, there is a very clear demographic divide between the Kashmir Valley side and Jammu. And on one side, of course, is Muslim majority, the other is Hindu majority. But even within, it's interesting that you raised the point about diversity. Even within Kashmir, when we were there, the cultures of obviously the Hindu culture and the Muslim culture was starkly different. The way we prepare our food, even language, the Kashmiri that Hindus speak and the Kashmiri that Muslims speak is quite different. The words that are used. Not to speak of the other ethnicities and other races. So, tell us something about the circumstances that led to the creation of the state.
So, Maharaja Gulab Singh was actually an employee in the Darbar of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And he had made himself a prominent face. The first sign of brilliance of Maharaja Gulab Singh as a general and as a strategist came when there was an invasion of Sikh forces on Jammu. This was around the time of Mian Mota Singh, and the Dev dynasty had essentially become defunct, and there were all these proxies that were ruling. Despite the lack of preparation, Maharaja Gulab Singh shone on the battlefield as a soldier, and that had impressed even the Sikhs to the extent that they wanted him to be part of the empire and its machination. So, him and two of his brothers, Dhyan Singh and Suchet Singh, all three entered the Lahore Darbar and rose the ranks quite swiftly thanks to their military and political acumen. It came to the point that eventually one day at Akhnur, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh was traveling, and Akhnur was on his way to Kashmir, in fact. And at Akhnur, Maharaja Ranjit Singh was generally so impressed that he asked Gulab Singh, "What do you want?" He said, "I want to be the king of Jammu." And Jammu did not have a king for some time now. This is about like 50 odd years easily, that there was nobody on the throne. So it was at Akhnur, in fact, that Gulab Singh was declared the king of Jammu And in fact, the Raj Tilak was done by Maharaja Ranjit Singh himself
Oh.
at that site.
And is this on their way to fight the Pathans?
Yes, this was on the way to fight the Pathans. in fact.
Okay.
And the fun part is,
And just to add a little
Mhm.
bit of detail to that, because we've done a video on that
Mhm.
history, that a delegation of Kashmiri Pandits had visited Maharaja Ranjit Singh
yes,
and asked him to intervene because the Pathans were creating havoc.
no,
in their
it's
lives.
interesting. Maharaja Ranjit Singh went, just a small diversion, Maharaja Ranjit Singh entered places whenever he was invited. He never really did an invasion. So that also puts into perspective a lot of things about how people entered.
Right.
Even when it came to Jammu, actually, the attacks of the Khalsa forces happened primarily because there was a lot of anger against the administration of Jammu that was being run by people like Mia Mota Singh at that time. Anyhow, one very interesting anecdote that I keep telling people is that instead of doing a conventional tilak, Maharaja Ranjit Singh drew a tilak from downwards, basically, saying that this is how you will root into the soil of Jammu as a dynasty. And that is how Maharaja Gulab Singh was declared. And the two brothers, by the way, Dhyan Singh and Suchet Singh, were also made Rajas, declared Rajas at the same time. Now, Dhyan Singh and Suchet Singh essentially continue in the service of Darbar. In fact, Suchet Singh even goes on to become the chief wazir of the Lahore Darbar. Because Gulab Singh is moving between Jammu and Lahore all the time, he is now less in terms of his involvement. With the demise of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, absolute chaos breaks out in Lahore. One of the first things that happen is that Khadak Singh comes to power, and the circumstances in which he comes to power is basically palace intrigue. Factions of the Lahore Darbar are rebelling against him, and there is a very strange incident that happens that the plaster falls down on him while he is standing under the gate of the Lahore fort and crushes him literally.
Wow.
Now the thing is that he had probably died on the spot, but they did not declare it because they did not want the turbulence, or rather the rebelling forces, to feel emboldened further. And Gulab Singh incidentally is in the fort at that time with his 2,000 odd soldiers. So in 3 days' time, you actually have the announcement happening that Maharaja Khadak Singh is no more and Kuan Nonihal Singh will be the new king. Kuan Nonihal Singh was not even born, by the way, at that time. So effectively, Maharani Chand Kaur, who was carrying the child in a womb, is declared the regent.
Right.
Now here's the fun part. The minute that is heard, a huge section of the Darbar, especially led by the Sindhanwala Jats, they attacked the Lahore fort, saying, no, this is not acceptable. They wanted their own person. Gulab Singh exemplifies himself yet again by actually defending the siege, defending the fort against the siege for 5 days.
Wow.
Eventually leading to a truce conversation being initiated. Now just imagine there are like 10-15,000 people outside and there are 2,000 people inside the fort, and still they managed to hold on. That is the kind of valor Dogras were recognized even by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Having said that, though, there was so much intrigue happening that Dhyan Singh, his brother, gets assassinated. That too rather publicly. And subsequently, Suchet Singh also dies in battle because he was on the opposing side.
Opposing side of whom?
Of the Lahore Darbar.
Acha. So
he was part of the rebelling forces.
Oh wow, okay.
So this was so when you see that 2 of your brothers have died, it is actually considered by analysts today that it is a miracle in some ways that Gulab Singh survived all this political intrigue. Maybe it was because he was never really in the Darbar and he kept moving between Jammu and Lahore at that time. That probably is also believed to be one of the key reasons why perhaps Gulab Singh decided to refrain from participating in the Anglo-Sikh wars that happened, especially the one that happened in 1844-45. The Sikhs lost. It is believed that the key differentiating factor was the absence of Maharaja Gulab Singh and his forces. Subsequently, though, Gulab Singh is actually appointed the Vakil or the negotiator by the Lahore Darbar in the negotiations that happened with the British East India Company. Now, what were the terms on which, and this is something that gets very heavily misrepresented. What are the terms on which the settlement was to be done? 1 crore Nanak Shahi rupees. Land to be given up all between the Indus and the Bias. all territories were to be given up, especially the hill territories were to be given up.
To the East
India Company. And there would be some reward accordingly decided for all the vakils who were involved in the process, as they were called. The Lahore Darbar actually had no money. So who pays the money? It is Maharaja Gulab Singh who paid the money for the Lahore Darbar. So that 75 lakh rupees that you hear about is actually the Lahore Darbar's payment to the British East India Company, technically.
Wow. Okay.
It is not a sum being paid for the purchase of Kashmir.
Right.
And for those who have any doubt, they should actually read the Gulabnama, which was thankfully documented at that time as an official authenticated biography of Maharaja Gulab Singh by one of his divans. So 75 lakh rupees is being paid. 75 lakh is the amount that is eventually decided because they realized that, by they I mean the British East India Company realized that it wants to have a presence in the hills. Initially, places like Noorpur, Guler, Kangra were also supposed to be part of Jammu, were eventually ending up in Jammu as part of this whole negotiation. Though it was not decided that it would go into Jammu, but the British East India Company was willing to take it. And in all likelihood, they would have given these areas to Gulab Singh as part of his reward for the Wakalat. But what happens is, the British East India Company changes its mind. They want to have their forces in this region because they want to keep an eye on both Punjab and Jammu simultaneously.
Wow. Okay.
And plus, the terrain is such that, it is you can come down, you can charge down from it, especially into Punjab if need be. So that is why places like Noorpur, Kangra, Guler eventually ended up as British territory. Whereas Kashmir, as part of the Wakalatnama reward, was given to Gulab Singh. And the fee was also brought down to 75 lakh. In fact, from the original 1 crore.
Okay.
Interestingly, the area that the original boundary was supposed to be beyond the Jhelum. So places that constitute today's Rawalpindi and Islamabad were also being given to Gulab Singh.
Oh, really?
Yes. So you could have imagined the territory going all the way. Interestingly or ironically, Gulab Singh said, this is beyond my control. It will actually stretch my forces. So I don't want to take the land. Give me land closer to the Jhelum. So Chamba, which was also being planned, he even gives up Chamba at that time. And instead, there are areas that are bordering Chamba today that eventually ended up with Jammu. So that is how. Yes. In the midst of all this, in fact, Ladakh had been conquered by the Jammu forces already. And this is prior to the Anglo-Sikh War. Gilgit-Baltistan campaign had been launched. They had actually managed to defeat the forces, but there was a rebellion and they were not able to back up. And this had happened because the Tibet campaign of General Zorawar Singh had failed.
Right.
In fact, General Zorawar Singh had died on the battlefield in Tibet, very close to Kailash Mansarovar, where he even had a bath, a sacred bath. For those who think that General Zorawar Singh Kalhuria was a Sikh, I'm sorry, he was not a Sikh, he was very much a Rajput. Kalhuria was a name he got because the king, Maharaja Gulab Singh's wife, one of his wives, was actually a princess from the estate of Kalur, which is today's Bilaspur in Himachal.
Right.
So she was called Kalhuri Rani.
Okay.
So she declared Zorawar Singh as her Muh Bola Bhai. That is how he got the surname Kalhuria.
Acha. Very interesting.
All the historical records that we have, in fact, is of that Zorawar Singh originated from a place called Hamirpur in Himachal.
Right.
So the point is that that also tells you how this entire region has cultural continuity.
So is there any doubt about Zorawar Singh being a Hindu?
Yes, there are significant diaspora elements that have been raising this question for the longest time. Unfortunately, there are some supposed Indian scholars also who made this confusion on many occasions and have called him a Sikh, whereas he was not a Sikh.
Right.
And frankly, at that time, what was really a Sikh in itself is a question that has been debated so much, I can't even get into that now.
Of course, yeah.
But it's well known that he had actually taken a bath at the Kailash Mansarovar. It is in the records that when they had won against the Tibetan forces, which were essentially supported by the Chinese forces at the time, Battle of Mantalai as it's called. After that, he'd actually taken a proper...
no, but that would be possible for a Sikh also, right? I mean,
could be, but I mean, the fact is that he did Abhishek and Puja, which none of the, even the Khalsa forces at the time would not do.
Right.
So, I mean, there are, and his ancestors continue to live, by the way, in Jammu. His
descendants,
palace,
you mean?
yeah, and they're all Hindu.
Right. Okay.
So if they had become Sikh, you would have gotten to see that, right?
Right. So there's when we talk about Kashmir, we start with the prehistoric times, and we talk about the the Nagas living there, and the, let's say, the mythical part of the history, the prehistory. Then, I mean, Nilamat Puran, and then we come to Raj Tarangini, and then Jonah Raj's Raj Tarangini, and then, I mean, of course, the medieval and the modern periods are more well recorded. But when we, I personally want to know this because my understanding of Jammu history is only from the time that Maharaja Ranjit Singh came into the picture. So I am totally blank about what happened before. So can you just tell us a little bit, like,
It's such a good question you've asked, and this is actually one of the biggest pain points I also have, that pre-Maharaja Ranjit Singh, public perception of Jammu's history is literally a gap that nobody is willing to address. Now, in the 19th century, Maharaja Gulab Singh had commissioned Ganesh Das Badhera. Interestingly, a man who had also served in the Punjab Lahore Darbar and then was subsequently employed by Gulab Singh to write the authentic history of Jammu, supposedly. Now, the interesting part is that when you read the text, you realize that Ganesh Das Badhera was a fairly well-read man, both in Sanskrit and in Persian. Though he wrote this original text called Raj Darshani, which was supposed to be the authentic history of Jammu in Persian, but the way it has been done, you see a lot of similarities with the way Raj Tarangini had been written, especially Kalhan Raj Tarangini, more than the Jon Raj Tarangini. So you realize that this man definitely was well read, and the book made a very good attempt at researching all the folklore, all the public stories that were being carried by Brahmins, that were being carried by bards locally. So how does Jammu come into being? Now, as per Raj Darshini, you hear the story of Maharaj Bahu Lochan and his brother Maharaj Jambu Lochan. These guys are descendants of the Raghukul, in which Bhagwan Ram has been born. In fact, it is interesting because a lot of people in the region, even the Sikh gurus for that matter, especially Guru Gobind Singh, has claimed himself to be a descendant of Lav and Kush, or one of the two.
Okay.
So that's the fun part. Descending, and Jambu Lochan comes up. Now he is hunting one day, and at a slightly elevated spot, he sees a lion and a goat drinking water from the same stream. Now this is a very fascinating thing for me, because when you hear this anecdote, you have heard this anecdote in many places when it comes to the history and antiquity. Now, what does this lore symbolize is a bit of speculation. My take is that probably it is about, a place where you identified that you could rule very effectively from. Though it is just a symbol of that. But this is the spot next to the Tavi River, and Jambu Lochan decides to set up the city of Jammu. On the other side, of course, his brother Bahu Lochan has set up the fort of Bahu and the temple inside it of Ma Bhadrakali, which is known as Bave Wali Mata today,
of course,
was set up.
This is how long back?
And this is supposed to be just around the Mahabharata era.
Wow. Oh, so that's how old it is.
In fact, the royal families of Jammu had apparently participated in the Mahabharata war as well.
Okay.
See, they are in many ways the culture of Madhya Pradesh, which is actually around today's Sialkot. Essentially is the culture of Punjab, Jammu and West and parts of Himachal.
Right.
People tend to, sort of miss that out.
Correct.
So it's a cultural continuity that's been happening. Unfortunately, the core, the source area has basically, disappeared from conscience, and for a lot of reasons demographically as well. But that is where the whole culture comes from. Another story, interestingly, about how Bahu Fort comes up is also mentioned in the same book, though, which makes the book's, chronology a little questionable. Now, there were these people called Chadaks. And Chadaks you can see as a, clan of people, even today in Jammu. Even on the other side, in fact, that is occupied, I would say. So, they were being terrorized by a demon. And there are these two brothers who say that we will kill the demon, but you make us the rulers of Jammu. So, Sham Singh and Dharam Singh. And they manage to kill the demon, and they make the Bahu fort by burying the arm of the demon. So Bahu, that is how the name Bahu turns out.
Okay.
Interestingly, the stories, the bards of the time say that when Sham Singh managed to kill, everybody, all the local people shouted Jai Dev, Jai Deva in absolute joy, and that is actually interestingly the way old Rajputs of entire Punjab hill states, Jammu, Kangra, Guler, Nupur, they used to actually greet each other with that salutation subsequently.
What is the salutation?
Jai Deva.
Jai Deva. Okay.
So it's basically referring to their Kuldevta and the Devi that they worship.
Right.
So now the interesting part is you have a similar story, in fact, for Kangra as well. The fort of Kangra, Nagarkot, where the ear of a demon was actually buried as the foundation.
Okay.
So again, as I keep telling people, cultural continuity is just amazing in this region, and people have not made that effort to even study it. Now the interesting part is, when does the first real historical evidence of Jammu's presence turns up? The earliest record that we see is of 815 AD. So that old is the presence of Jammu. Now there's a place called Baner in Jammu, Babur, which is actually part of Udhampur, which is further away from Jammu and closer towards the Kashmir Valley. We know for a fact from Kalhand's Raj Tarangini and Chamba's copperplate inscriptions of that time that survive. And Chamba is one of the oldest princely states in North India, in fact, that has managed to survive for all this time. That there was a ruler called Surajdev who was ruling in a place called Babbapura, as has been mentioned in Raj Tarangini. And the same name you find. So the first archaeological and liturgical evidence that you see actually is there around for 815 AD. And in fact, there was a temple complex built there, which in architectural styles is believed to be very close to the Kashmiri temple architecture. Another interesting fact that you get to hear is that when the Dhar dynasty turned up eventually, this is Suraj before the Dev dynasty, one faction of that was actually brought to Kashmir by the Kashmiri scholars and the Pandits to rule over the Kashmir Valley because they had run out of the royal family itself.
Oh, wow.
So for about 100 or 200 years, a fraction of the Dhar dynasty was also ruling Kashmir as independent rulers.
Right.
So the presence of Kashmir has been shown in the 19th century. While you may say that textually they are trying to build that relation, but the fact remains that. So in the year 1815 is the first reference, as I mentioned, was when we got to know about the existence of a kingdom. And of course, the fact that they were also linked to the Jaipal Shahiyas, there are in fact coinage evidences on the same that they were feudatories of the Jaipal Shahiyas. Subsequently, though, of course, the Dev dynasty as it came up also was recognized for a variety of reasons. One of the very interesting stories, in fact, and this is a point where the history also gets contested and distorted at the same time by just showing one side of the picture. Raja Maldev. This is around late 1300s, early 1400s, and Raja Maldev is recognized for having had a battle with Temur, the invader.
Okay.
Temur was going back towards Central Asia, and he decides to invade Jammu in the process. Now, if you look at just Temur's record, he says it was a small battle, half an hour, I finished it, etc., etc. But when you read the Raj Darshani version of it, and this is something that was consistently passed down by generations, you realize that there is a different angle and a different view to it, which makes you wonder whether the battle was actually a stalemate. Now, as per the Raj Darshani's version, the battle went on into the night. Temur's soldiers were seeking refuge in the forests around Jammu, and they were literally chased and hunted down in the forests of Jammu by the Dogra soldiers of the time. So that's the question that nobody wants to answer, and this is how history gets distorted, especially about Jammu, because it is an inconvenient history on a lot of questions.
Right.
Similarly, there are records of the Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, having actually come to Jammu to take darshan of Mata Vaishno Devi. Now, that is a very inconvenient record again, and that is why you never get to hear about it. And it is recorded in the Royal Annals because Guru Gobind Singh was actually very well received by the Raja of Jammu as well.
Right.
So,
and in fact, one of his great generals was from Jammu. Banda Bairagi.
There is this angle to the whole, the way even Gurumukhi comes up, that because Jammu and Kashmir's Brahmins had such an important influence on the Sikh Gurus in their code, in their following, they definitely had a role to play in the way the Gurumukhi script came up.
Right.
Now, if you've seen the Sharda script, you've seen there was a similar script in the hill states called Takri. And Takri and Sharda are literally like twins, sister scripts.
Right.
And from the same set of scripts, you see something like Gurumukhi turning up. And there's a lot, and for the naked eye, you would not be able to see any difference at the first glance. They would look nearly the same to you.
Right.
And you can always, I mean, if you've seen, there are manuscripts which have these three scripts going together. You see that happening. So there was a lot of cultural influence on what was happening in Punjab particularly. For that matter, it was also a refuge for a lot of Hindus of Punjab, a lot of the traders of Punjab. So during the time of the missiles, Lahore, Rawalpindi, even Amritsar, these places see a lot of harassment of trader communities. And this is around the time of Raja Ranjit Singh Dev. So this is like the early 18th century. And a lot of the traders actually migrated to Jammu. And they were given land, they were given areas for setting up shops by the king, just so that they could resettle and restart their lives. So that tells you that Jammu has also served as a refuge center, not just from Kashmir, because it is known that there were many Kashmiri Pandits also who served in the darbars of the Jammu Rajas, but also for Punjab and other areas in the plains.
Right. No, that's what I was mentioning, and I mean, I'd like to hear your perspective, if there is any, about that, which is that since you mentioned Guru Gobind Singh, his most valorous, most successful general, who was instrumental in his victories, is from Jammu, right?
Yes.
Banda Bairagi.
Yes.
And the fact that no one talks about that, and the people of Jammu seem to have forgotten their role in in the major role that they played in the history of India.
Exactly. And the sad part is, within Jammu today particularly, he is a nearly forgotten figure.
Correct.
Except for a few intellectual circles where they still manage to hold on to that memory. But the sad part is that there has been a systematic effort to, forget the links of Jammu particularly, or rather the fact that Jammu served as a link between Kashmir and India. Strategically, if you think about it, it's the confluence of culture. It is the place that gives a springboard for either side.
Absolutely.
And Jammu also served as a sword arm for the dharmic communities of the region for a very long time, especially the Dogra forces. Even if they were mixed, they was definitely playing that role. A lot of temples, for instance, in the Dogra period were reinstated and restored in the Kashmir Valley, particularly by kings like Maharaja Pratap Singh. Even Maharaja Ranjit Singh did a lot in that sense.
True.
There are these old mohallas in downtown Srinagar where they actually remember the temple by saying that the Shivling was installed at the time of Maharaja Pratap Singh.
Right.
That is the level of, that was the first breather for the Kashmiri Pandit community in centuries.
True. No, in fact,
they were able to thrive.
It was not just a breather; it was actually a lifeline.
Exactly.
Because today, the Kashmiri Pandits who exist owe their existence to the Dogra rule of 100 years. Otherwise, if the Pathan rule had continued, then I don't think that there was any chance for us to
definitely.
survive.
And the fun part is that, Kashmiris were also, after that, Kashmiri Hindus particularly were trying to, go into different, ventures. We know for a fact that under Maharaja Hari Singh, there was a chamber of commerce set up by the Kashmiris, particularly, which was led predominantly by the Kashmiri Pandits. So Kashmiri Pandits had even started doing trade businesses because they were able to have that kind of space to go look beyond just the academic circles or the typical court work circles.
Right.
So the community was genuinely thriving till the disruption that happens in 1947 for a variety of reasons that probably are very well understood.
Right. So, I mean, the flip side of this argument, where you say that the Kashmiri Pandits were thriving. So there's a lot of, I believe, what is propaganda about how the Kashmiri Muslims were, they were trampled upon. And, in fact, I had a conversation with a policy think tank. I'll not name them. One of the directors of a policy think tank who at that time, this is 2016, very early into the new Modi government. And the person believed that he was rationalizing the acts of terror by Kashmiri Muslims because he said that they were under a lot of oppression and they faced a lot of atrocities under the Dogra rule. So obviously they are like that. And I very politely asked him, why do you believe that? He said, that's what people have told me. So I mean, for a think tank, a director of a think tank to say something like that is, but that's another matter. What that reflects is that this is the common perception. So what do you make of all that?
Honestly, I'm just tired of this propaganda now for a variety of reasons. This is a lazy argument that has just been conveniently picked up to justify certain actions of the past. I'll give you some very good pertinent examples, in fact, how Dogra rule was supposedly oppressive. The first time land reforms take place is under the Dogra rule within the state. They actually tried to, even before that, they actually tried to save the population of the Kashmir Valley from starvation. One of the early acts of Maharaja Gulab Singh was to ensure that a supply system for providing sufficient quantity of rice to Kashmir Valley could be set up. And the terrain is such that it was very difficult to get rice from Jammu into Kashmir at that time. Despite the massive loss to treasury, that was ensured by Maharaja Gulab Singh. So if this is oppression, then I think anybody would welcome this oppression first of all. Having said that, 1847, a monumental year for a variety of reasons. Today, Kashmir is known for its Pashmina, Jamwar shawls. 1847, the shawl buffs of Kashmir went on a strike. In fact, the shawl buffs were under so much stress that they had already started to emigrate to Amritsar en masse in the early 40s. And they were only 25% or 30% of the original numbers of shawl buffs left. Now, why did they strike? Maharaja Gulab Singh calls for an open darbar with the shawl buffs. And he gets to know that shawl buffs work under the most oppressive conditions. Now, the shawl buffs were definitely not being run by the Dogras, right? Till then. What are these oppressive conditions? No fixed, the worst of incomes that you could imagine. You could not even change your employment place apparently till 1847. And raw material supply would always be an issue, because of which shawl buffs would be heavily indebted most of the times. So what did Maharaja Gulab Singh do? And this was institutionalized and even made more important in other ways. Maharaja Gulab Singh fixes a minimum wage rate for the first time for the shawl buffs. He gives them the freedom. If you don't want to work with a certain Karagar house, you work with another Karigar house. So you can change your jobs.
Right.
Third, he also, gave a consistent incentive to ensure that raw material supply would never be a problem to the shawl industry. Subsequently, even under Ranbir Singh and Pratap Singh, shawl industry was given a very important stature. They allowed the Europeans to trade openly in Kashmir. Kashmiri shawls would actually go for exhibitions in places like Paris in that era, thanks to the Dogra rulers. So what are you talking about? Where is the oppression here? Now let's talk about other industries. Kashmir was very famous for its silk at one stage, and the industry had declined quite badly. So what did Maharaja Ranbir Singh do? He set up the Resham Khana that is there in Srinagar today to revive and boost the silk industry. In his own rule, there was a massive disease that had struck the silk cocoons. So he actually imported silk. He brought in technical experts from outside, from abroad and from within India, including Master Binod Bihari Mukherjee, to help the people learn the intricacies of silk rearing, silkworm rearing, and the thread and spooling. So when you see these kind of steps taking place, now this is on the economic front. Even on the social front, frankly, the first college came up in Srinagar, the first girls' school came up in Srinagar, the first boys' school came up in Srinagar, right? Roads were built to allow people easy passage. So where is the discrimination? The second hydroelectric power plant of India was actually built in Kashmir started under Maharaja Ranbir Singh and eventually was commissioned under Maharaja Pratap Singh. So who are you trying to bluff? Even the system of Begari was abolished by the Dogras, not by anybody else. Now they may claim that Begari was there. There are operational inefficiencies, but fact remains that legally it was banned. Taxes were withdrawn on things as basic as salt so that people's lives could be better. So where is the oppression?
No, I think if I may play the devil's advocate here, I think it's not always about. I mean, what you have described does appear to be like universalist in nature. That these are aspirations that everyone has, but that is sometimes not true. If you watch some of the videos on YouTube, you will find out that the people are not really looking for that, and sometimes road access or ease of doing business may be seen as oppression. So that's what often happens. But one of the events in 20th century history is that of the 1931 riots, which we were also talking about before we started this podcast. And there it is claimed that it was a rebellion because for almost a century people were oppressed, and now they were expressing what really happened in 1931.
The Martyrs' Day event is one event that has seen the most amount of misinformation propaganda, honestly, over nearly a century now. And here, when you stack up the facts, let's stack up the facts on this one. Here is a man, all of a sudden, this is just after Muhammad Ali Jinnah's visit, by the way, to Jammu and Kashmir. A man, out of the blue, starts shouting that I have seen the copies of the Holy Quran being desecrated. They had been stuffed inside pages of it had been stuffed inside a toilet. The irony is that this man did not know how to read or write. So how did he know that it was copies of the Holy Quran? Subsequently, this man also disappears and melts into the scene and is nowhere to be seen again. However, before he melts into the scene, he is paraded around Kashmir, particularly Srinagar to begin with, and then other parts like Padgam, etc., to rouse public sentiment. By public sentiment means specifically the Muslim majority sentiment, so that rioting and wanton looting can start. It is in the process that the police force actually tried to control the riot measures. Unfortunately, the level of propaganda is such that it is said that Muslims had died. Frankly, the India office records don't say that Muslims had died. It is clearly written in the India office record that it was Kashmiri Pandits who had died in the police firing. Which makes you wonder. Yeah, exactly. Which makes you wonder, were they being used as human shields then?
Right.
In the valley, were they being used as human shields by these rioters? The pressure on Maharaja Hari Singh's administration is so huge that he tries to arrest anybody and everybody under the sun just to control the situation. And the British use this as an excuse to force Maharaja Hari Singh's hand inside the valley. Now, you also have to put this in context to something that happens 2 years before the event. The roundtable conferences are taking place in London. Maharaja Hari Singh is the only ruler in the States Conference who openly says that the interests of Jammu and Kashmir lie in a free, united, independent India. Contrary to the perception that is created about Maharaja Hari Singh. And not one speech, but 2 speeches, back to back, where he says this. So the question arises, who was the man who was trying to force Hari Singh's hand here? Was it a ploy of a bunch of people and their loyalists? And that question never gets addressed because that question cannot be discussed publicly today. Even now in Kashmir Valley, you cannot be honest about this discussion. 1931 pe holiday manga. But when it came to giving the holiday of Maharaja Hari Singh's birthday, why was there so much of a hesitation for so many years?
Right.
Because you have to create somebody as a villain at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and the circumstances that led to the accession of Jammu and Kashmir, a lot of just drawing room opinion is floating around as authentic description of the events, and it's frustrating because just a couple of weeks back, I had this small tiff on Twitter where people are just they're just speaking out of their hat and saying that, oh no, if Hari Singh had moved quickly and just acceded to India as quickly as possible, then we wouldn't have lost Gilgit and Baltistan because this was a huge blunder. And I kept telling them that as early as the 1930s, he had made it abundantly clear that he is going to accede to India
Yeah.
in the event that, whenever the British leave
Yeah.
and all that, because it was already in the air. And so it was totally clear that his vote was with India. It was just a question of then working out the details. The devil is in the details.
Exactly.
And obviously he was delaying it because he also needed to negotiate. Certain. It's not like if
Definitely.
you buy a house,
Definitely.
when you buy a house, there is so much negotiation
Exactly.
that goes on. This was a whole state which has to be.
Exactly.
So no one knew that that these Kabalis will be suddenly pushed into Kashmir, and so give me your perspective of what all happened around that time.
Again, as I always say, let's stack the facts on this. So let's stack the facts. Under Maharaja Pratap Singh, there was already machinations of the British Empire taking place to play the great game. And Jammu Kashmir was definitely part of the great game and was at the epicenter in many ways. Maharaja Pratap Singh was actually caught out, thanks to a vizier of his, in a conspiracy where he was inviting the Russian forces to come and invade India. Of course, Maharaja Pratap Singh also asked how silly this argument could be, because you cannot say that I will write letters in Dogri, which is such a vaguely known language, all the way to Russia, right? To ask them to come and invade.
Right.
Be that as it may, what they had forced Maharaja Pratap Singh as a result to do was, one, they abdicated him and brought in a council to rule. Second, they took over the control of the Gilgit-Baltistan agency simultaneously. By the way, the actual boundary of Jammu and Kashmir was not just restricted to Gilgit-Baltistan. Even Chitral should be counted as part of Jammu and Kashmir, because they were actually feudatories. They had signed treaties as early as under Maharaja Ranjit Singh to be a feudatory, and they would pay a yearly Rasana for a tribute to them. So the boundary is actually all the way up till Chitral,
Right.
which is in today's North Pakistan. Now, Gilgit-Baltistan was effectively governed by the British till 1947, and then it was essentially kind of handed over on paper to India. What's going on in the background? Negotiations are going on. The only state that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has to manage and convince for accession is Jammu and Kashmir. And the reason he gives is because I am originally Kashmiri, so I know this place like the back of my hand. Of course, the real reason was probably because he had some kind of secret admiration for Sheikh Abdullah, who was not known beyond like 10 districts of Kashmir, frankly, and had zero influence amongst the Muslims of Jammu, by the way, or even Ladakh, Gilgit, Baltistan, Kargil. And because he had been put in jail for his nefarious activities, the issue of accession was stalled solely on the point of the release of Sheikh Abdullah. There are letters between Maharaja Hari Singh and Sardar Patel on this subject. And Pandit Ramchandra Kak, who was the Prime Minister in the interim before Justice Meherchand Mahajan became the Prime Minister in the emergency and accession happens, there is a memo of his that surfaced a few years back, which actually showed that the interests of the state were being looked at from the perspective of how Hindus and Buddhists, particularly, and other dharmic people would not be persecuted within the state. What was the guarantee given to it? And with the persistence on Sheikh Abdullah, who was, by the way, part of a Muslim conference, till it was made into a J&K national conference, there was no guarantee for it. Especially after the 1931 incident, nobody was willing to take that chance. But Jawaharlal Nehru insisted on that being the precondition, and him being installed as the Prime Minister, that him as in Sheikh Abdullah being installed as the Prime Minister, before anything could be done about the accession. Keep this in mind, at that time there were these rumors being floated that a Dogristan will be created. Some Sant has been, some Mahatma Sant has come and has given that prediction. So this is a story that a lot of people tell you about that. And at that time, standstill agreement was also signed with Pakistan by J&K, by the way, which was of course grossly violated. But the Dogristan rumor was basically a cover given by the intelligence agencies on the backdoor channel negotiations that are already happening. It was not a question of if J&K will become a part of India. It was a question of when and how and what circumstances now J&K becomes a part of India.
Right.
So the very idea that is propagated by elements in India and in other countries that J&K was not willing to be party to the Indian state is blatantly false.
Correct.
Let's be very clear about it. Now, you may say that I am quoting a right-wing perspective. Let me quote a left-wing perspective on this. Prem Shankar Jha, as left as you can get when it comes to Indian academics and journalism, has written a book about this, and his justification is that in 1947, Maharaja Hari Singh realized that despite being a Muslim majority state, there was so much diversity even within Muslims that utter genocide would happen amongst the Muslims if Indian state was not opted for. And that was the kind of sagacity Maharaja Hari Singh was carrying and his cabinet was carrying.
Right.
You had Shia dominance in Gilgit-Baltistan. You had the Sunni dominance in Kashmir. You had again Shias in Kargil. What would happen?
True.
Gujars, Bakarwals were anyway seen as the lowliest of lowlies amongst the Muslims. So they would be basically treated even worse than slaves. And Gujars and Bakarwals had a special affection, in fact, towards Maharaja Hari Singh. There is a very interesting anecdote about Maharaja Hari Singh and his interaction with the Bakarwal. Apparently, there was a huge herd of sheep and goats that was trying to cross the road, and Maharaja Hari Singh was stuck in his car for half an hour behind it. So he asked his driver to go and inquire what's going on. So the driver sees these Bakarwals trying to get all these sheep across the meadow, and he's like, "Jaldi karo, gaadi nikalni hai." And it doesn't happen at the pace. So this driver gets very frustrated now, and he pulls out his gun, his revolver, and aims it at the Bakarwals. And this old Bakarwal says, "गोली चलाने की हिम्मत है तो चला के दिखा, ये महाराजा हरि सिंह का राज है, तू नहीं बचना." This is the kind of trust, and this is not my words, by the way. This anecdote has been told by the Chief Justice of India, who also hailed from Jammu at that time, of recent times, Justice T.S. Thakur. So when you know these stories, where is the so-called oppression, or where is the so-called accession in doubt? In fact, let me put it in context. Nobody can tell me where Sheikh Abdullah was at the time of accession.
Right.
Can anybody tell me where Sheikh Abdullah was at the time of accession? Was he in the Kashmir rally? He wasn't.
He was probably being hosted by Nehru.
He was in Delhi. You're right. He was in Delhi.
Yeah.
कौन सा freedom fighter है वो? I'm sorry, I mean, I get very riled up on this subject, but you have misrepresented it so badly. In fact, General Sam Manekshaw has been on record to say this, that Jawaharlal Nehru was waffling despite Maharaja Hari Singh saying that I'm willing to sign anything right now, just save the state.
Right.
And it was Sardar Patel who intervenes. Jawahar, do you want Jammu Kashmir or not? Of course I want Jammu Kashmir is the reply Jawaharlal Nehru gives. And so Sardar Patel is then just keep quiet and let the things happen now.
Right.
And that is when military action was allowed. By the way, Lord Mountbatten had been continually playing the great game behind the curtains by continually creating that standstill arrangement. Gilgit-Baltistan had already fallen before or nearly at the same time that the tribal invasion started. You have to remember one thing, the Hindu forces that were located, and many of them were actually Gurkhas who used to serve for Maharaja Hari Singh because they had married into Nepal and so had ties. So the Gurkha soldiers were butchered overnight by the Gilgit Scout Muslims.
Right.
Led by a British general who was later given one of the highest civilian awards of Pakistan, military awards of Pakistan.
Wow.
So it was already known that the game would be played out. They wanted a toehold to keep a continued eye on Central Asia, particularly the Soviet Union. There was no other place better than that. Earlier it was Afghanistan and Russia. Later it became the Soviet Union. And this is not just me, by the way, pointing this out. Narinder Singh Sarila's famous book on the Great Game, which goes by the name In the Shadow of the Great Game, also points to this very fact. That all the correspondences happening of the British at that time with their own foreign offices was consistent on one thing. We need to split this state or get this state somehow into Pakistan so that we have a toehold. Pakistan's creation was primarily to create a toehold in the region.
Tell us a little more about the Great Game then. And is there a connection with the Dixon Plan and how the international community has played that part in, in continuing this problem, and intensifying this conflict even to this day, so that we have a more
definitely
longer perspective.
So the Great Game, for those who may not know, was essentially premised on this whole problem that had turned up. when the British had taken control of India, all of a sudden, to their horror, they realized that they are very close to Russia, and Russia was still a major military power at the time. There was this notion that Russia could come via the Afghanistan route and invade India and take over it. India being the crown jewel definitely was something that would not be key to them. Plus, the whole world, pre-World War I situation was such that keeping an eye on Russia was critical. Afghanistan was the playground for the longest time, but they realized that Afghanistan was not a stable playground. They needed some place where they could continually keep an eye on. That is why Jammu Kashmir became the focus. And the Great Game, frankly, continued even after the Second World War, despite an alliance between Britain, US, and the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union had become communist, and communists were feared like anything. So would Afghanistan also fall? That was the continued worry of the Americans and the British, which is why there was a conscious attempt first to somehow get Jammu Kashmir into Pakistan. All the time that was the narrative that was said by Lord Mountbatten in his correspondences, even to the Indian officers, despite being the the Viceroy of India. Secondly, when the matter went to the UN Security Council for arbitrations, you realize that there are continued efforts to somehow not just create a standstill, but ensure that a significant chunk of Jammu and Kashmir ends up with Pakistan. Now, there were two plans particularly. One is the McLaughton plan, and then there was the Dixon plan. The McLaughton plan was basically asking for first taking control of the entire region by the UN security forces, and then they would go for plebiscite in pockets, which would mean that certain pockets would end up with India and certain pockets would end up, and an overwhelming majority would end up with Pakistan. That was not accepted. That is when the Dixon plan comes in. And the Dixon plan essentially is you partition the state and divide it accordingly between the regions. The Muslim majority regions, all of them go to Pakistan. The Hindu majority regions and the Buddhist majority regions end up with India. So basically a truncated Jammu and Ladakh would be with India. Kargil
and the valley.
Gilgit Valley would be with Pakistan. And then you can have the population exchange accordingly. Now, the idea behind it was that eventually demographic change would take place in the region of Jammu that is under India's control. And then you would be able to, also change the ground situation. Though Dixon was an Australian judge and he frankly had no interest in doing that. But these were the reasons why Pakistan was more than willing to play game on the Dixon plan. And if you look at the way demographic changes also happened in Indian-controlled Jammu areas, earlier, out of the 10 basic, large original districts, 6 were Hindu majority. Today, it is 4. Especially in areas that are closer to on the boundaries of Pakistan or on the boundaries of the Kashmir Valley. The demography has significantly altered. Even in the Chenab Valley region, where Hindus and Muslims were nearly in equal numbers for the longest time, Hindus have gone under 40% today.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of factors that have contributed to it. But add in another layer to it, and that is settlement of illegal refugees like the Rohingyas.
Absolutely.
Which have been done deliberately in Jammu. Illegal settlements under the Roshni Act have been done exclusively in Jammu. Bhai, agriculture, these pastoral lands were just restricted to Jammu, kya?
True.
They were also in Kashmir na. Why were the Bakarwals and Gujars never settled there? Nobody's asked that question to date. So what the game has been is that under the Roshni Act, and maybe if you allow me to elaborate on that.
Please.
Under the Roshni Act, land encroachment in Kashmir was done for building lavish hotels and tourist resorts that are owned by people in the Kashmir Valley. Whereas in Jammu, it was done to settle certain people or certain religious demographies and alter the demography of the Jammu region altogether. So that if tomorrow there is any kind of invasion or any kind of uprising that takes place, you cannot say that there is religious and ethnic diversity in the region.
Right.
You have to realize this. Bhadrawa, for instance, was a major hotbed of terrorism. You know what was the rhetoric that was fed to the Bhadravai Muslims? That you are Kashmiris. And for the longest time, they were buying it lock, stock and barrel. It was to the wisdom of certain Muslim elements within of the region originally, Dogra, Bhadrawa belt. They eventually realized that they were being exploited by the very same nefarious elements who had been running the entire state like their personal fiefdom for the longest time.
वोट के लिए ये कश्मीरी हैं.
Correct.
For benefits, they are not Kashmiris.
Right.
So you see how it works out.
Yeah. No, it's very clear. I mean, the link with the original Great Game and how politics is playing out today. Just the last episode of our podcast, we had Madhu Kishwarji. And what has happened in Kathua is unfortunately linked with the very same forces.
Exactly. And Kathua is well known as a border area, especially because smuggling of arms was always a problem. Smuggling of drugs into Kashmir. By the way, Jammu and Kashmir is one of the highest drug addiction rates in the country. Everybody knows this. Why is that being done? Nobody wants to answer that. And we know that when you have problems like these in border states, you are generally creating a population that will offer little to no resistance should an invasion happen tomorrow. There are nationalist forces even inside Jammu and Kashmir, and a lot of them in fact. But if they are weakened and emancipated to this extent, how will you then be able to create the instant defense that you need or create the ground intelligence that you need to combat terrorists? One particular aspect that used to happen earlier was that in these areas, especially upper hills of Riyasi, Poonch, Kathua, Doda, Kishtwar, there were village defense councils which were predominantly made up of Hindus because it was the Hindu villages that used to get attacked.
Yes.
Now, over the years, there has been a deliberate attempt to villainize the village defense councils. And that is where the demography also is being...
No, in fact, the village defense councils were one of the most effective strategies in countering terror.
Exactly. So, village defense council ka idea aaya first in 1995.
Okay.
And that happened because there was a village, I think Rawankot or Surakot, I can't remember exactly. It was in Poonch. People were being basically massacred left, right and center in the upper hills after Kashmir had been ethnically cleansed of Hindus. Now the next target was Jammu. And they started off with the hills by killing off villages. Prankot, Surankot, n number of massacres were taking place. In one particular village of Rawankot, terrorists had attacked the Hindu village. The Hindus fought back tooth and nail with axes, with spades, whatever they could get, any agricultural tool, even managed to kill 2 terrorists. At that time, one particular gentleman named SP Vaid, and this is his testimony by the way, who reached the next day.
He was in the police.
He was the SP of that belt in fact, who went on to become DGP also of J&K police. So Mr. SP Vaid said that the locals said, had we had guns, we could have literally cleaned all of them out. That was the intent of the people to stay put in the land. So, the very first village defense committee was actually set up in 1995 when SP Vaid requisitioned the administration to provide some guns to these villages. And these are not modern weapons, by the way. These are literally World War II rifles.
Right.
How effective were VDCs? So, if VDC was not able to wipe out all the terrorists, they at least gave the room, the important time window for armed forces, paramilitary and police to arrive so that they could take over the operations. That was the extent of success of the VDCs. Nobody wants to even acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And they prevented to a large extent from demographic shift to happen in these belts. Unfortunately, there was a conscious attempt to villainize them. Because the elements that exist in Jammu and Kashmir, who are in power despite, a lot of overtly changes, saw them as a hurdle in creating the kind of demographic change for the Dixon Plan's activation. If you recall, in 2013, major rioting had broken out in Kishtwar. Now, a lot of the national conference leaders and the Kashmiri leadership tried to shift the spotlight not on the rioting and the loot and arson that was undertaken, but on village defense councils shooting at people for self-defense. So they said their guns should be taken away. One of the leading forces in that was actually a certain gentleman named Omar Abdullah, who was the chief minister, and he even tweeted about it at that time.
Yeah, of course.
A committee that was set up, by the way, Justice Gupta's committee, took a totally different line. It said the VDCs were critical in ensuring that terrorism was wiped out of the belt, and rather modern weapons should be given to these guys. But the villainization process has started.
Yes.
First, they tried to confiscate the guns in 2016-17 under Mehbooba Mufti. And by the way, all of them, despite the political parties, they've had the same agenda for the last 70 years. When people started outraging over the seizure of guns, what they said was, oh no, we are not taking your guns. We are taking them and going to replace them with modern weapons. And we need to, maintain these weapons. You don't know how to maintain them. So, in 2018, they start taking the weapons. And actually, a lot of the weapons are never even returned. That is what was the reason why the incident in Dangri took place.
Right.
That the VDC had no weapons to fight back the terrorists when they were being attacked. So who's responsible for this? And especially when the LG administration on record is coming to say that we are going to modernize them, we are going to provide better stipends. It was not even a stipend, frankly, it was an honorarium that doesn't even, what they were getting was peanuts literally.
Makes no difference, yeah.
They don't even earn from it.
Yeah.
It's just to maintain the weapon at the end of the day. So, the sad part is that the LG administration woke up only after the Dangri incident took place and weapons were basically reinstalled, and then they said, we will train them. Arey Baba, these people are capable enough of doing it themselves for all these years. You think you will provide some special training to them? See, horizontal movement of terrorism has always happened whenever in the Kashmir Valley terrorists were facing the heat. So this has been their way of opening the pressure valves. Now this is an old strategy, and if you are not prepared for this old strategy, this really speaks volumes about how casual you've been about the whole terrorist problem.
Correct.
And frankly, the committees there was the file on the committee's stipend was held up for 1.5 years. For whatever reasons that we don't know. But after the incident, it got cleared because there was so much hue and cry about it.
And this is when?
2020, last year.
Oh, okay.
Last year, eventually, earlier this year when the Dangri incident happened, my bad. So after the Dangri incident, the file gets cleared. So more than 1.5 years, the file has been sat upon with nobody interested in it. Another interesting incident that has taken place in recent times that tells you how demographic shift is being attempted by identifying people specifically. So an RTI was floated in Jammu and Kashmir to ask if there are people who belong to RSS, Jamaat-e-Islami, and other such institutions working in the government services. Now the state government service rules or even the central government service rules that may apply now because it is a UT have no restrictions on what is your affiliation so long as it is non-political. However, interestingly in Jammu, a conscious effort was made to ask every employee to sign an affidavit or even provide an affidavit that if you are associated with the RSS, to disown the RSS or say that you are part of the RSS but you will not be.
So they had to sign some kind of...
They were made to submit affidavits by the LG administration. For whatever reason, now the theory that comes up immediately is, were they being identified for specific hit jobs? No, I am not sure, but it seems like there was a concerted effort
but this is strange because now it's a union territory and...
Which makes it even... That's exactly the point. Why was it being done? Nobody has answers to this question. And this is as early as 2021, in fact, when these affidavits were being asked for.
There's an interesting parallel which comes to my mind when we talk about VDC and their demonization. Is the demonization of Khap Panchayats.
Yeah.
Because they are more effective and they can dispose of these small cases of matrimonial dispute and property dispute within the village. And it's been happening for ages. But if you just mention Khap Panchayat, you will get a reaction from the masses. And they'll be like, no, how can you say something like that? When the fact is that the world over, wherever there is pressure on the centralized justice system, customary justice forums are the way out. And someone was recently telling me, a friend of mine, she works, she's training as a lawyer right now. And she was telling me that a very interesting statistic that in the US, the Supreme Court, it takes up 70 cases per year. And in India, the Supreme Court takes 700 cases per month. And why they are doing it anyway, so that's a digression. But this empowering of the local community to fight back terror, that would be the no-brainer solution to what is happening
Exactly.
in J&K.
In
But
fact-
that is being disempowered.
In fact, one of the things that I've always been talking about is that given this VDC model, if there were to be a strategy to bring back Kashmiri Pandits today into the valley, especially in the rural areas, because there was a significant migration from the rural areas, contrary to popular perception.
Correct.
Urban populations are not necessarily as big as the rural populations, right? This is the only approach you can do it.
Yes.
And honestly, residents within the state of J&K have to also be resettled along with them to strengthen those VDCs so that these kind of nefarious activities cannot take over.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
In one
no-brainers, but I don't know.
In one of our proposals
Hmm.
from Upward, which we called the Kashmiri Hindu Resettlement
Yes.
Act,
Yes.
we had included this point of empowering by arming
Exactly.
the minorities, which is Hindus in this case,
Exactly.
so that they can defend themselves. And this is an empirical fact that we were left stranded by the state to die
Exactly.
or to get converted, and that is why we left, right? So now that you have objective empirical evidence that this is what happened, so the logical step is to say sorry and to say that you take care of yourself,
Exactly.
because we aren't able to.
Exactly.
But that will never happen because of all that
Sadly,
you
for a
narrated.
variety of reasons, that will not be allowed.
And I mean, given all this background, I think the empowerment of Hindus as a community in any context, right? Whether it is to save our temples,
Yeah.
to work for ecology and conservation of natural resources, whatever it is, the empowerment of communities never happens. And it is always the same route is taken that, if this happens, then some demonization, some incident will be used to demonize, and the Hindu masses will be more than willing to accept it.
See, this is what happened in 2008 when the Amarnath Yatra agitations took place. What was the Amarnath Yatra agitation actually about? And the fact remains that it was a protest supposedly being done to quote unquote save the ecology, but was really about why are so many Hindus turning up even temporarily to
Right.
visit the Amarnath shrine. And when the people of Jammu protested, because most of, not the, I would say, monetary benefit, but most of the tourists actually would flow out of Jammu, providing sustenance level incomes for a lot of people, it became a matter of great concern. Similarly, when the Rasana incident happened,
If I may interject, I think the 2008 agitation was perhaps the first time in modern Indian history, in Jammu history, where people said, the Hindus of Jammu said, enough is enough.
yeah,
And I think it was more than just economic.
especially this was, and that too in the context of something like the Praja Parishad Andolan have taken place so many decades back.
Right.
That the Hindus of Jammu actually came together and really, as you said, enough is enough was the statement. You saw a similar sentiment even when the Rasana incident happened,
Yes.
for a variety of reasons, especially the way, as in Amarnath and in Rasana, the Jammu Hindus were villainized.
Correct.
They were shown as despots, they were shown as communal people.
And not just communal, they were shown as sympathizers of rapists.
Exactly. All that was being asked in the Rasana incident was, get the CBI inquiry.
CBI inquiry करवा लो यार, मतलब how, मतलब इतना
It
क्या?
was bizarre.
Yeah.
I am not defending anyone. But I also, even today, say, why is the CBI inquiry not happening on the case?
Absolutely.
It took so much effort to at least get a genuine inquiry started. And that too, I mean, after a lot of twiddling of thumbs.
True.
And the case
And
was
at the
false from
cost
the very
of
beginning.
at the cost of lives.
At the cost of
after
lives.
after spending 1.5 years, that
Exactly.
Vishal Jangotra, he was finally acquitted, when from day one, anyone with a slight interest in the case would say that, ye to bichara muft mein mara
You know
ja raha
what's the worst part? And this is a bit of a digression, but you'll find it funny. You know, Jammu Kashmir till the Article 370 is reading down was seen as, they had the Ranbir Penal Code applicable. Now, these people had so much problem, especially the mainstream Kashmiri politicians had so much problem with torture, with human rights violations. Ranbir Penal Code was at least 100 years old, where even under torture, any testimony that was taken would be considered as evidence. So the court case was actually tried under the Ranbir Penal Code and not the Indian Penal Code, first of all. Which tells you how grossly unfair the trial must have been.
I didn't know that. I didn't actually.
For that fact, in fact, Madhu Kishwarji herself faces a case
Correct.
of defamation thanks to Shujat Bukhari, the late Shujat Bukhari, that was filed under the Ranbir Penal Code, conveniently.
Right.
Because if you don't turn up in court, next day what?
Right.
That is the kind of Ranbir. So, and no reform was ever carried out of the Ranbir Penal Code by these guys who had so much problem with torture of the Indian army.
Yeah.
And a supposed torture, rather, I should say, because more than half of those stories were never true.
Yeah. So what I was coming to was that when we talk about the agency, the collective agency of Hindus, I think you just mentioned Jammu Praja Parishad. It was one of those rare events where the Hindus had kind of organized themselves politically, and it was going somewhere. Tell us more about that.
So, in the aftermath of 1947, when Sheikh Abdullah gets power and starts behaving like an absolute despot. By the way, for those who don't know, Pandit Ramchandra Kak was actually seated on a donkey by Sheikh Abdullah and paraded in Srinagar with a blackened face, and people were throwing cow dung on him all through the Muslim mohallas. So this is the kind of Kashmiriyat that we saw in 1947 for the first time. Now, having said that, it was becoming increasingly clear that Sheikh Abdullah was all out for creating an Islamic riyasat, that too where the power would be concentrated primarily in the Kashmir Valley. By the way, Sheikh Abdullah was the reason why the armed forces of India never crossed the LOC.
Okay.
Because he was never popular in those regions.
Right.
So he said, I don't care. And by the way, it's not just me who said this. Even somebody as senior as Maruf Raza, a former army veteran who's a security expert, he's also said this on record.
Right.
In the past. This was the mentality why they let the LOC happen and went to the UN for all, sundry reasons that were quoted subsequently. However, what was being realized was that this guy would not share power with people equitably. And that is when a lot of people who were associated with the RSS in the valley, which had been banned, came together, led by Pandit Premnath Dogra ji, among other people, and even Balraj Madhok was part of the Jammu Praja Parishad in its initial phases before he was externed permanently from the state. So, they come together, they formed the Jammu Praja Parishad. One of their first statements about the objectives of Jammu Praja Parishad is that we stand for a united India where there is no discrimination in terms of law, where all laws are equally applicable on all subjects. For which was eventually picked up by Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and who passed away because of the very same. In the culmination of the Praja Parishad movement, in fact, is when he passed away. Ironically, the picture that many supposed leftist scholars give is that the Praja Parishad was asking for an independent Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this is the absolute dishonesty with truth that has been done over the decades, and nobody wants to be on. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru comes in 1949 and sermonizes to the Jammu people that, boss, ab international ho gaya, issue chup raho. This is the kind of rhetoric that Jammu people were listening to. 1950 to 56, a student agitation also kicked off simultaneously, because when the Constituent Assembly was being formed, it was realized that Jammu would not be given equitable share. By the way, only 2 candidates were allowed to contest the Constituent Assembly elections that year from the Jammu Parishad. It was either the NC, JKNC, or the Congress that were allowed to enter the Constituent Assembly of JNK. And we all know what happened subsequently. The issue kicked off in 1950s because of one incident particularly, where the students of Jammu refused to salute the JNK state flag.
Right.
Which was effectively the flag of the JNK National Conference. And the protest that broke out also saw students being killed in police fire in the state. By the way, the level of torture that the people suffered during these agitations was such, instances just horrify you to this date. People were being fed lime in their dal and roti. They were tortured beyond imagination, not just in Jammu and Kashmir, mind you, by the way, even in other parts of North India. For those who may not know, Shanta Kumar, who was also the Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh, was one of the young student protesters protesting against what was going on. And he was thrown in jail as a 17-year-old and subjected to severe physical and mental torture. This is what was going on in the Indian state as well, not just in Jammu and Kashmir. And the protests keep happening, and I mean, eventually news is censored to the point that nobody knows what's happening. You can't even imagine that Jammu and Kashmir is a part of India anymore for that reason. Thanks to people who were associated with the movement, who saved the archives, that we know what had happened there and the levels of torture that took place. There are so many of today's BJP leaders of that era who vowed that they would never sleep on a bed till JNK was fully integrated in India, and they were not able to see that happen in their lifetime. They slept on the floor all through their lives. They never cut their hair. Those are the kind of vows those people had taken. Of course, I mean, leaves you a lot to wonder about what happened to their BJP. But that, I think, is a different subject.
Right.
But I'm glad at least they are being acknowledged and recognized today.
Correct. So what really was, how did the Praja Parishad then fare? And
eventually, or sadly, Praja Parishad died. And whatever was left of it merged into the Jansang.
Okay.
Because they realized that they would need a national party support to be able to even continue initiate a discussion. Their backs were so much against the wall thanks to the oppressive regime of Sheikh Abdullah. Even after his dismissal, by the way, Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq was no different to the Praja Parishad guys. He continued the policy. And the discrimination against Jammu has gone on for the longest time. A lot of Kashmiri Pandits, when they were forced to move out, basically thrown out, I would say, of the Kashmir Valley, ended up in Jammu, they were left aghast. They did not know that Jammu was in such a pathetic condition.
Right.
I think that is really the first time even a lot of the Kashmiri Pandits got to know what the realities of Jammu were.
True. Yeah.
And I mean, that was probably the reason why an initial round of friction took place, because neither party was able to understand what was wrong.
Absolutely.
The Jammu people had been kept completely isolated, save a few elite leaders who had been in, connivance with the establishment. And thanks to the Kashmiri Pandits actually coming to Jammu, we saw an effort to understand, things like jobs beyond the government.
Right.
Or, the fact that we need to study more. Those things became more mainstream in terms of culture also in Jammu.
No, there was a genuine intermingling of culture.
And genuinely, both sides have respected each other since that time, anything. In fact, today, people of Jammu have been fighting to get the townships of the Kashmiri Pandit, the migrants, as they're called. And the word migrant is actually an insult.
True.
The victims of the genocide, the kind of conditions that those townships have is pathetic, to say the least. And it is the Jammu people who have been leading protests on that.
Right.
Okay, bhai, at least give them some form of electricity and proper supply of water. Na? Kashmiri Pandits, they also know that they're a micro voice eventually. But it is the Jammu people who have literally led their voice from the front and have been shouting at the top of their voices to address their issues. So that is the kind of respect that both communities have come for each other.
Unfortunately, Jammu city itself has problems in electricity, as we were discussing.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And that is the discrimination, na? That is the discrimination. Jammu to exist ही नहीं करता ना लोगों के लिए in the administration.
Correct. Actually, when it comes to Article 370, for example, a lot of rhetoric has happened because of now that it has been made inoperative. A lot of people have, in fact, for the first time in their lives, actually come to understand what Article 370 was, and in the mainstream. But there is this tendency to actually reduce the complexity of the problem of Jammu and Kashmir to Article 370. And there's just one very basic question that if you ask yourself, or if you ask someone who's making that error, is if Article 370 was preventing Hindus from other parts of the country to settle in Kashmir. Okay, that much is granted. But it was not preventing the Hindus from Jammu to go and settle in Kashmir. But the fact that they didn't, points to a reality which is beyond just Article 370.
Exactly.
And by removing Article 370, while you may have taken a good step a long overdue step. What has really changed on the ground beyond just TV debates?
The idea of Article 370 being, made inoperative was welcomed like anything in the state of J&K, especially in Jammu.
Right.
And for the first time, and this is also a sign of diversity, that people felt that they could finally get a chance to be a part of the state where they were living for 7 decades. Communities like the Valmikis, who were brought in by Kashmiri Muslims to clean their toilets, by the way, and were never granted state subjecthood, were finally seeing a ray of hope. Communities like the 47 West Pakistan refugees, who had so much cultural affinity with Jammu, but were kept in the dark, literally and figuratively, for the longest time, saw a ray of hope. Communities like the Gurkhas of Jammu, who had lived and were not given state citizenship despite being there for 4 generations or 5 generations, saw a ray of hope. But there's been so much that has made it so, such a false reality for them all of a sudden and all over again. The way or the process by which the state residency is being granted is taking them months and months on end with no clarity in sight ever given to them. Ironically, when you look at people like the Rohingya refugees who have been illegally settled in Jammu in the past decade and a half, they have even Aadhaar cards. They even have electricity connections. But why do these people not get those kind of facilities? We don't know. And nobody gives a very clear answer on that. There were long overdue infrastructure development projects which were in the aftermath of Article 370's in operation were kicked off. The pace of implementation of the projects leaves so much to be desired. Even the quality of and the nature of work being done leaves a lot to be desired. For instance, there was an outer ring road that was supposed to be built for Jammu. That project was in the pipeline for 25 years before it was started around 2019. They said we'll finish it in 3 years. 3 years. Now they're saying it will take another 3 years. So what is the real intention in that case of delaying such a project? If this is the level of planning that is being done for implementation of the projects, it leaves a very bitter taste in the minds of the people. For that matter, there is still a grouse. Either we should have also been devolved as a separate administrative unit and had nothing to do with Kashmir of present, or we have to get our rights secured in some way or the other. And sadly, some of the steps that are being taken in the name of creating parity between Jammu and Kashmir right now, for instance, the delimitation exercise, is causing a lot of heartburn in Jammu. So now here's the fun part. In 1998, when elections were called after a very long time, it turned out that there were more voters in Jammu than in Kashmir, registered voters. Since then, there's been a conscious effort to somehow show the population of Kashmir Valley more than that of Jammu. Ironically, whenever they used to go and ask for funds from the center, they would say, "Arey, Jammu ka area bada hai, to zyada hame dijiye funds," based on area. But when it came to redistributing that fund, Jammu's population is smaller on paper, so we will put everything in Srinagar. And Jammu ko baad mein dekhenge. Any new institution, education or otherwise, would be consciously taken to the Kashmir Valley, particularly Srinagar.
True.
Jammu would have to agitate, it would have to protest, cry itself hoarse, and then something would be thrown like tidbits towards the people of Jammu. That had literally become the nature. And people in Jammu, on a lighter note, they've become so krantikari and Andolan Jeevi only for this reason. Because that has been their lived experience for the longest time now.
Right.
So, these kind of problems have happened, and IIT was taken to Srinagar. It was after much protest that an IIT was brought to Jammu. Similar with an IIM, AIMS, same story. But the way the projects progress in Srinagar versus the way they progress in Jammu, the difference is to be seen for all. For that matter, the LG administration, unfortunately, is perceived to continue being partial towards the Kashmir Valley. And people in Jammu keep complaining that they are seen as thieves and crooks and lazy as folks who don't want to do any work and just want to take benefits of the government. It couldn't be more ironic because the maximum tax revenue that comes within the state actually comes from the Jammu region.
Of course.
Most of the revenues from industrial activity comes from Jammu region. People pay bills of electricity only in the Jammu region. So, I mean, I don't know what's the problem here then. If you want to show the state as, aligned with India, it is only because of Jammu that you're able to give that perception, not because of the Kashmir Valley, really.
True.
So, this kind of stepmotherly treatment has, really been stoked further by the delimitation exercise that I had mentioned earlier, wherein they're, in the name of trying to create parity between the two regions, now we have,
isn't it?
It's created a very strange imbalance. Kashmir region will have one extra seat over Jammu, and the Jammu seats are actually an inclusion of the new addition, which includes seats that have been reserved for specific communities. Now, these specific communities include Kashmiri migrants, which nobody will object to, frankly, or even the POJK migrants, the Mirpur, Bhimbar, Kotli massacres that took place in 47, because of which the invasions were emboldened. The Hindus that still survive. By the way, for those who live in Delhi, if you've ever heard of a place called Rajouri Garden, it is actually settled by the people who had suffered the massacre of 1947 in Rajouri at the hands of the Gujars and the Muslim Rajput soldiers that were part of Hari Singh's force, and then they defected towards Pakistan. So, those kind of people will be given a seat. You are reserving seats for Gujars and Bakarwals who get classified as STs. Now, the Pahadi community, by the way, was also being classified as STs, so they'll also come into the picture. The question arises, is it really representing Jammu's interest? And the people of Jammu sadly don't feel that way. They think that Kashmir will still have an upper hand. And they're not even asking for a hegemony, they're just asking for equal treatment at the end of the day.
Right.
Fundamentally, the question remains, if geographically Jammu is the bigger area, why are there more seats happening in the Kashmir Valley? That is where the 2011 census is such a big problem. In 1998, you discover that there are more voters registering in Jammu than in Kashmir. Then all of a sudden, 2001 onwards, any census shows Kashmir's population being disproportionately larger than Jammu's population.
Suddenly.
So, what is going on? On top of that, you have laws that are so discriminatory that people of Jammu are being forced into an economic migration, essentially reducing the numbers of the Jammu Valley, because when it comes to giving government jobs, all your jobs, except for say 10 or 15%, go to the Kashmir Valley. When it comes to government postings, the same story happens usually. And that has been a very big bone of contention for these guys. Whenever more Jammu students start coming up in government job exams, those exams tend to end up in courts being contested for their validity and legitimacy. So who's responsible for this kind of game? You are actually creating the grounds for a silent exodus of the people of Jammu, particularly its Hindu majority, so that the future generations are not there. Old people are forced to sell off houses from entire localities, even in the town of Jammu, in the city of Jammu rather, and they're being settled by certain kinds of people. The Bhathindi forest, which was a protected forest by the way, disappeared thanks to the Roshni Act, and an entire township of a certain community turns up. And that township also has houses, posh houses, mind you, of many leading IAS officers, of politicians, of judges who belong to the Kashmir region.
The Sidra area?
Bhatindi.
Acha, Bhatindi, okay.
Sidra तो अभी latest किया है ना, उससे पहले Bhatindi was cleared off.
Right.
Mind you, that has been also responsible for the kind of problems with respect to the weather and the heat that you see now in Jammu.
Yeah. No, I can testify anecdotally. Whenever I've gone to Jammu, I have progressively seen with my own eyes the demographic change happening, and it's not something that you can miss.
Yeah.
If you have the slightest perceptive eye, keen eye for these things, you will find out for yourself.
The sad part is that it was only after repeated raps from the Jammu Kashmir High Court that an effort been made to take back the land that was illegally squatted upon and seized in the Jammu region. Though there have been representations by certain sections, even to the levels of the Prime Minister, to not let these seizures happen.
Yeah.
But Roshni Act is illegal, repeatedly been told it's illegal. which was brought in by a collusion of all politicians of the Kashmir Valley, active at that time, in the name of providing just and equitable share of land to communities that they have been responsible for depravity of their poverty, of the kind of third-class citizens treatment that they get, not the people of Jammu. So they should be sharing it at their end, na? उनके लिए सब जम्मू.
This, I mean, this we can go on, and there will be
Never be
several-
anything to it. Yes.
And the way I see it generally is that this maxim that politics is downstream of culture. It applies to situations across all kinds of problems that we see, and the lack of agency of Hindu society. I've been myself witness to these conversations in my home whenever we visited Jammu, Dogra friends, all that. Everyone is aware. It's like the environmental crisis.
Exactly.
It's like saying
Everybody knows.
Yamuna is polluted,
Yeah.
but no one knows what to do about it. And the same situation there also. And I think a part of that conundrum is the fact that Jammu seems to be, unfortunately, like Kashmiri Pandits, we have a clear-cut reason for saying that our culture is on the brink of extinction. We can't do much about it. But the people of Jammu have lost their culture.
Definitely.
And one of the examples of that, which I was telling you earlier also, symptomatically, if we speak, is this stopping of the Bali Pratha in the Bave temple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And people of Jammu actually think that, oh, no, it's okay. This was never there, or they have some story about why. But this is a reflection of the fact that the Hindu society has lost conviction. They don't have any religious mooring, and whatever is the latest woke trend, they'll go and stick to that. And as a result of that, when it comes to politics, when it comes to these existential issues of demographic change, of hostile political elements and international forces ganging up against you,
Exactly.
you recognize that, but you're not able to do anything because you're paralyzed.
Exactly. It's such a good point that you raised, Ashish. And you think about it, I'll give you a very good example. The Dogra Art Museum in Jammu is probably the only art museum in the world that you can think of that has changed its location so many times. And despite being an art museum, doesn't even have proper air conditioning most of the times. How will you preserve priceless art dating back to as early as the 17th century if this is the state of affairs that you're running on? Or for that matter, the Mubarak Mandi, which was the seat of Dogra power. Now, Mubarak Mandi's restoration work has supposedly been going on since 2019. And it was declared a protected monument in 2005-06, mind you. So restoration work started at least like 10 years after that. Till 47, it was actually the seat of administration in Jammu. And how the art and culture has been decimated over the years. So there was this building called Taksal Ghar, basically where the coins of the Dogra state would be minted. That Taksal Ghar was demolished to make a school for the children, supposedly, of the locals. And the walls were made of pink limestone coatings. So it was a very unique building. None of those walls survive today. It's all ugly concrete and brick. This is the level of respect that was given to Jammu heritage. A lot of your structures inside the Mubarak Mandi complex are in very poor condition. In fact, earlier this year, the J&K High Court, which was hearing a petition on the slow progress of the Mubarak Mandi restoration plan, visited the complex and found that at least 3 of the buildings of the complex that were on paper supposedly have literally disappeared. Disappeared in the sense that they have been lost forever. Because rain, no protection, the works that you can think of. And in the name of heritage restoration. The pace has been extremely slow, and there have also been efforts to create, commercial structures in protected sites, which is a gross violation of the law. For God knows who's doing it, we don't know. Who's promoting this, we don't know. What we definitely know is that consultants in the past have said that this project is not financially viable, and yet it is being pursued. So I don't know who's responsible or who's in charge, in fact, in Jammu and Kashmir if this is going on. And even for that matter, the kind of artwork and heritage that was in Srinagar, that was the work that was initiated by the Dogras. For those who don't know the Sri Pratap Singh Museum in Srinagar, for instance, if you think about it, it was started by Maharaja Pratap Singh. We know for a fact that a lot of artwork was smuggled out of it by the network of Tushar Kapoor. At least 90 artifacts.
Oh, that international racket.
Which included Jammu heritage, especially Basholi paintings, which included coinage, which included a bus of statues and heads. And mind you, archaeological work has come to a standstill for a very long time in the region. Now think about it, Akhnur is one of the oldest sites in Indian civilization because we know there was a Saraswati Sindhu civilization site that was discovered at Akhnur. So it's one of the northernmost sites, in fact. After Afghanistan, that is the northernmost site that you can think of. We don't know what is the status of that. There was a Buddhist site also discovered there. We don't know what's the status of its protection. So there's been a continued decay. And if you talk to people who've been associated with these traditions, you talked about Bali Pratha earlier. Till the 1950s, there are people who can testify that they've seen Bali Pratha at the temple. Today, there is this fanciful story that's floated that Maharaja Pratap Singh had a dream where Ma Bhadrakali came and said, I don't want any animals. And I'm like, boss, if it was really the case, at least kisi state archive mein to hona chahiye, na? Where are the state archives?
This is the first time, I think, in 10,000 years of Indian history where Bhadrakali would have come and said, I don't want Bali.
No. And honestly, she is the Kul Devi of a martial race.
Yeah.
Come on. You expect martial races not to take Pashu Bali?
Right.
There is a reason why they would do it. Because you are going to war. The reason, and if you don't have an Ugra Devi supporting you, you cannot win.
Correct.
It was not a peacetime step all the time. People would do it also in the condition of they had some very deep desire that they wanted fulfilled. Otherwise, they would not engage in it.
No, absolutely. A slight digression here because this is always a matter of where people make straw men. that Bali, if the Devi wants Bali, she will take it.
Exactly.
If you don't give Bali, she will still take it.
Exactly.
And people must be, cognizant of this fact.
Exactly.
And stopping Pashu Bali in a temple like that, which has a historical importance,
yeah,
I think that is catastrophic.
Exactly, because it was very much interweaved into the culture of Jammu as well.
Yeah.
It was not just, people were not killing animals left, right and center. You have to realize the way Pashu Bali works.
Yeah.
Especially in the hilly states. I'm also from the hilly states, right? We are not killing animals for fun.
Yeah.
That is our last step, literally our last step. When we want something to be fulfilled in a very deep sense or something that is very traumatic for us. And we need help.
Yeah.
When we are calling upon Bhagwati to come and help us, or when we are calling upon our Kul Devtas to come and help us, or Kul Devis to come and help us. Because we are in such dire straits. So the way the strawman arguments come, as you say, it's just bizarre. Anyhow, that being said, coming back to the point, the way, people have been consciously kept away from their own history and knowledge. Important books are not available in circulation in the state, in Jammu particularly, about Jammu's history. It takes monumental efforts. People are still using, by the way, photocopies of old cyclostyle notes that were first printed out in 1980s. What's going on? You can't even ensure that books are in circulation. Research work has come to a stall, especially in the space of history and archival research for the longest time now. And people who tried to, fight this system, I know of people who got so frustrated they took voluntary retirement out of sheer disgust and frustration from the heritage, archaeology, archival departments for these very reasons. State archives need a lot of work and upkeep. We don't know what's the state. They're supposed to be in Jammu, or where are they? We don't even know that, honestly. Have they been preserved or not? A lot, and there are private initiatives that are doing it. But frankly, for instance, nobody can read Takari today, the Dogri Takari. the Dogri language Takri, which is slightly different from other parts. Very few people can read it today. A lot of Sanskrit work was written in that.
Right. Just like the Sharda script.
Exactly. And Takri was the script that literally united the entire region.
Right.
And in fact, if you could read Takri, you could also read Sharda, is the kind of relation that was there. So that's what I'm saying. The cultural link has deliberately been broken so that people are not able to build that bridge all over again by the very subversive elements who've been, running this place like their own fiefdom for the last 70 odd years. And sadly, instead of having a full integration, all that you do is optics.
Correct.
For instance, when this man from Jammu, Ratan Singh, was shot dead in Kashmir Valley because he was working at a liquor shop. At a liquor shop in the Kashmir Valley. They started targeting not just outsiders, but even supposed insiders of the state. No? Which tells you...
No, for them it is very clear. See, for the subversive elements in the valley, for the lack of a better word, Jammu Hindus are outsiders. Which is the point that I was referring to, that even when 370 was there, okay, we understand others could not come in, but why wouldn't the Jammu Hindus move?
Exactly. And the worst part is that you see how now people of Jammu are again being, put in a corner, that they will again stand in agitation and protest and again get villainized. You're creating as an administration the very same grounds by, pandering to the same set of people, by asking and encouraging them to, become part of the democratic process all over again, after having done all that they've done in the past, instead of taking a clean break and starting afresh. I will probably never be in that position, but if I were in that position, I would have at least tried to pursue that path.
Right.
And in all fairness, there are elements who stand for your country even there. Instead of strengthening their hand, you are strengthening the hands of the very people who have, played the double dholki with you for all these years. There was this popular joke that Farooq Abdullah used to shout Azadi in Kashmir. He would talk Article 370 in Jammu and he would talk Bharat Mata Ki Jai in Delhi.
Yeah. It was actually a joke, but it was also the truth.
It was literally the truth.
Yeah.
Abhi bhi kya ho raha hai? It's the same story being played by the same set of people. Whereas they have no legitimacy today within.
Just to add to that joke, it was not just Bharat Mata Ki Jai. He would also say Jai Shri Ram.
Exactly. Abhi recently he did that. I remember. Somewhere he did that. So these people have such duplicitous characters as again and again being encouraged is a very big concern. Jammu has burnt its hand with these people. Why would it want them all over again? And if you think that you can, play this reservation of seat game and win the election, I'm sorry, you will not be able to do that. Jammu will again get the short end of the deal.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this in conclusion, right? As a Kashmiri Hindu, I am absolutely clear, whether someone agrees with me or not, that the genocide that we faced, especially the latest episode of that genocide in 1990, the Indian state was complicit with the Pakistani establishment in driving us out, in killing us, and in our cultural extinction. So I am absolutely clear about that. And when I look at Jammu, I do think a similar ploy is in place. The only thing which makes it subtle and less obvious is the demographic nature of Jammu, which is still Hindu majority. And so they have to do it very carefully. Otherwise, they would have just wiped Jammu Hindus out. हमारा तो हो गया जो होना था. Given that reality that the state is not with you, let's remove the state from the equation. We know how it is. What can, and I know this is a question that I hate myself when someone asks what we can do. I don't want pointers, but just like your thoughts on what can Jammu people do now and how do they go about it? Because frankly, I mean, this is the most obvious, the most fundamental demand, to have a separate state of their own and to be autonomous that way, to take care of whatever is bothering them. What do they do?
You've hit the nail on the head, in fact, in the question itself. I've had two parallel thoughts on this. One is this idea whether Jammu can be made part of a larger hill state, which includes Himachal Pradesh and also probably Uttarakhand, because the cultural continuity is quite significant on either side of Himachal Pradesh, rather, I would say. And this is a state that would have significant number of even say parliamentary seats, at least 15 or something of that sort. And other option, of course, is that because there will be problems and there are demographic concerns in both these states as well, mind you.
Right.
Uttarakhand, we all know what's
Right,
going
right,
on.
right.
Border villages getting infested by certain kinds of people. What do you do with Jammu then? Can we have a separate state for Jammu, or at least a separate administrative unit for Jammu, in the sense that it is a separate union territory? People are not even asking for a state necessarily. What they're saying is make us totally different, because we are culturally different, we are ethnically different, and we have a very different demographic breakdown as well. So we need to be administered for keeping in mind our demands, our requirements. You cannot have others piggyback on us anymore, and take advantage of our presence in the region just so that you can create some kind of rhetoric. See, at the end of the day, something that Panun Kashmir had suggested, and this is an old demand that has been there, you break this into 4 states. If you don't break it into 4 states, break it into 4 administrative regions. Yeah. I think that is a very fair, legitimate solution that even Jammu people would agree upon. Because Jammu's requirements with respect to development, with respect to infrastructure, are way more than Kashmir right now. See, you are taking the train all the way to Kashmir. Okay? You brought in the Kashmir rail. The Chenab Valley Railway Bridge has been under development for donkey's years now. I am not saying that they're not trying or they're not making that effort, but you realize how distinct the issue is there.
True.
And it takes effort. Mountain infrastructure development is not an easy task. Now, if the files are going to go continually to Srinagar to get clearance, they will never happen in time, is the way I see it. Even though the project is central, but the point being that local administrative approvals, the works always take place. And Jammu's administrative network has been kept weak for a very long time. If Uttarakhand could be made a separate state out of Uttar Pradesh, what is the harm in making Jammu a separate administrative unit? Is the question nobody wants to answer. The sole reason, again, as we had said in the beginning, the idea of India ko perpetuate karne ke liye, and the fact Jammu Kashmir stands as India ko prove karne ke liye, we use Jammu as the ploy. Was that idea died? Let's be honest about it. That idea died long back. As late as 1990, we knew the idea was dead. So let's be real and let's move with it accordingly. I think even within Kashmir, there are elements who would not mind a separation from Jammu. They couldn't care less.
Yeah.
The only question is whether it is a UT, is it a state, and that's about it,
Right.
as I see it today.
So, yeah, I agree. And my question was slightly different there. So these are like, if I draw the analogy with Kashmiri Pandits, it's like saying that, yeah, we want Panun Kashmir. We want Kashmiri Hindu Resettlement Act, all that. But those are again within the purview of the state.
Yeah.
Now, in my personal conversations with other Kashmiri Hindus, I always advocate for that we should forget about the state doing anything for us.
Yeah.
And let's hope for the best and be prepared for the worst, at least.
Sure.
So, from that perspective, I believe that Kashmiri Hindus should set up some institutions to preserve our culture, our language, our religious tradition, and try to, build from scratch again.
I get you.
Given your knowledge of Jammu history and I can see how much you've internalized it, what would be an analogous approach to Jammu Hindus?
That's a very good question. And since you're putting it differently, the problem has been that the Jammu folks have tried to build up institutions over the years. There's a Dogri Sanstha, for instance, that came up. There are also other, cultural bodies in Jammu that are present. But all of them sadly stand, almost on the verge of collapse or on the brink of extinction for 2 core reasons that I see. One, that the youth is definitely not interested, given the problems of economic opportunities that stand with them in Jammu. Second, the continued sustained migration that is taking place of people in Jammu. Now, this is where it is very important that these institutions either revive themselves or new institutions now be set up by the the diasporal committee of Jammu specifically.
Right.
What happens is that unfortunately a lot of the diaspora communities where people of Jammu come in get hijacked by certain specific communities, especially those who belong to the valley in present days, in the present day. So the real voice of Jammu never really comes out. Numerically, Jammu people are not necessarily that big, just like the Kashmiris, right? At the end of the day. So how then do they do that? I think social media is playing a very big role in reviving some of this. For instance, the usage of Dogri had literally come to a collapse just a few years back. But thanks to social media, it's actually picking up again. You see folk music, you see Dogri language music, you see Dogri language poetry and art, and even literature now coming back to the mainstream. And we have to also, for instance, make a conscious effort to at least popularize our own culture and language in that sense. And by I mean not just Jammu, but in general the hill states. For instance, writing. It's been a very long time since I've seen a Dogri newspaper, frankly.
Right.
Can somebody pick it up? It is something that is it's not an easy step for sure. But trust me, there are takers for it.
Yeah.
There are these shows that are run on YouTube, thankfully, by news guys. For instance, Aao Kar Duggar Di Galbaat. So these are beautiful shows that actually are done in Dogri. अब दूरदर्शन से डोगरी को भूल जाओ, मतलब that is as good as not having a Dogri show or channel. What is it that we can do for ourselves? And even the media presence now, the local media presence of Jammu has to take a conscious stand on promoting these very things. I attended an event in Jammu where it was quite fascinating to see people sing folk songs. But the problem was they sang just 2 folk songs, otherwise it was all Hindi, Urdu, ghazals and all that. And I'm not against them. My problem is that where is the Dogri culture?
Yeah.
Where is the Dogri essence?
Yeah.
Nobody was introducing Jammu as the city of temples. That used to happen in my childhood. Jammu was known as the city of temples. Ab koi Jammu ko city of temples bolte hi nahi.
True.
Can you imagine? The Vaishno Devi Yatra used to actually start from Raghunath Mandir in Jammu.
Yeah. Correct.
Who goes to Raghunath Mandir today? There was a conscious effort to take the train all the way to Katra, and that has killed Jammu by the way.
Yeah.
So now what is the way out to put Jammu back on the tourism map as well? Is something we all need to consciously focus on. The people are trying to come together and promote Jammu culture, Jammu heritage on a in whatever little way they can. But I think this is where some of the larger mainstream political parties have a very big responsibility also, in my opinion. If you really want to show people as part of India, you have to show Jammu for what it is.
Yeah. No, and I think that while that is a optimistic approach, political parties and responsibility is an oxymoron. So that is not going to happen. What I do believe the Jammu community should be doing right now is to promote pride.
Yes.
And especially the Dogra Rajputs, who have an illustrious history.
Definitely.
So there is no running away from that.
Definitely.
And if they are able to inculcate that pride, then things start happening on their own.
Definitely.
And I think there is also a great room for collaboration between the Kashmiris and the Jammu Hindus to preserve their common heritage.
Yeah. Not just that, since you mentioned heritage, something like the Mubarak Mandi, what's happening right now, or the tardy pace of restoration work of the heritage side, should actually be bringing people to the streets. That's how I see it.
Absolutely.
And given the fact that local body elections are also coming up, it should definitely become an issue of great importance for the people of Jammu. Something as basic as you will not get up votes if you cannot promise timely completion and respectful completion of the project.
Right.
For the longest time, Mubarak Mandi was, or rather even today, at least amongst the conscious Dogra community members, holds the same value that Raigad holds for the Marathas.
Right.
It's literally at that stature. Why are we not playing that up? Why are the people of Jammu being silent about it? Or why are they not aware about it is the real question that we need to ask. And that is where civil society, or whatever little is present of it, they're making that effort. I can just pray that their effort gets that voice from here.
Absolutely. I think that spark that we saw in the Amarnath agitation has to spread. It has to become a forest fire. and spread to all, and I don't mean it in the sense of them coming out on streets and taking on the law and order
Definitely.
apparatus, but all I'm saying is that passion to stand up for themselves, I think there is no running away from that. That is imperative. If they don't do it, I think they are also headed
Definitely.
to a similar fate as our community.
Definitely. And see, Dogras have been the absolute model citizens in many ways also of this nation. They have stood for the nation's demands even when it came to giving their lives. So it's not that they are going to shy away from a good fight.
Yeah.
But the fight has to be principled for them, and that is what they will do.
No, in fact,
And even the protests, for instance, they will do it all in the ambit of law and order. Let's be very clear.
No, but that's the thing.
But I get you. I get what you're saying. It has to be.
I was watching a podcast of this great new thinker, not new but relatively new, Daniel Smacktenberger. I don't know how to pronounce it. But what he says is that when you talk about well-adjusted individuals in society, if the society is insane, then well-adjustment does not mean much.
So true.
So in a similar way, if you are respecting or you are being model citizens, if the state is turned against you, then being a model citizen is basically taking it lying down.
True. No, point well taken. Point well taken.
So thank you, Rohit. Thank you very much for coming and speaking with me. And I hope we'll meet again, and we will take yet another very difficult topic, which is environment, on which.
Sure.
And I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much, Ashish. It was a pleasure talking.